Labor Day weekend approaches, and after that, as we all know, it's right into the heart of general election campaign season. Hi, I'm Chris Casteel with the Oklahoman in Washington, and I'm here with University of Oklahoma political science professor Keith Gaddie and pollster. Keith, thanks so much for coming in. What are you doing in Washington this week?
Well, Chris, this week is the American Political Science Association's annual meeting, and we come back to D.C. periodically because, there is government here in politics, so we like to check out what's going on. But, I edit a journal, so I have to come to this meeting every year, and it's, we get together and try and figure out what's going to happen next.
Great. Keith, you're an expert on Oklahoma politics here, and that we all tap for observations, but you're also a pollster, and one of the first things I want to ask you about is about political polling. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how different this year has been, but we've seen, some polls showing people ahead that turned out to lose, most recently Lisa Murkowski in Alaska. And I was just wondering, what are your own observations about that? I mean, there's a lot of speculation that polling has become unreliable. I don't know if it's just political polling, but because of cell phones, that there are far fewer landlines, so there's a certain part of the segment that's just not being reached in polls.
Yeah, and Chris, these are legitimate concerns, and in the interest of full disclosure, we had one of the polls that missed. Every poll in Oklahoma missed the Democratic primary for governor back in July. Yeah, and there was a reason why, which was we were all working off of a likely voter model, a likely voter screen, very similar models, and usually those models work pretty well. But the Askins turnout game, their ground game, get out the vote effort, broke the turnout model. And we're in the midst of doing additional polling and additional statistical work to demonstrate this. But we know from their campaign how they approached their turnout, and it did skew the turnout model, and this is also what happened in Alaska. The last-minute entry of Governor Palin changed the turnout dynamic for the Alaska gubernatorial primary and likely led to a failure of the poll. Now, you brought up this issue about cell phones.
Right.
Oklahoma has a real high level of cell phone-only use.
Okay.
We have not seen that yet become an impediment to getting to likely voters. Okay. And American Association of Public Opinion Research, the studies we've gotten out of CBS News, ABC News, out of the major polling shops, shows that cell phone voters and non-cell phone voters are very similar in terms of how they voted in 2008 and the responses they give. So we don't have a bias problem yet, but there's going to be one coming. And one thing that's happening is cell phone numbers are being opened up to us to use as pollsters. We just have to tell the public that we will compensate them for the cost of their minutes if they ask us. So we have different rules we have to deal with. So we're looking at alternative sampling frames and approaches to get to the electorate.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, the poll that everybody in Washington's been talking about this week was what the generic ballot number, which in this case, it was the preference of would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat for Congress, 51%. I believe, though, they were in the field last week, but the number came out this week. 51% said Republican. I believe 41% said Democrat, which is, that's big, right?
Yeah, it is.
And besides being big, is that also, 2 months out from the election? I mean, how reliable do you think that could be at this point?
Well, next week this number will look just like it did this week. And the way the race looks right after Labor Day is usually how the race turns out. A lot doesn't change most election years from Labor Day till the end of the campaign.
Oh, really? Okay.
It can change, though. It can change. But this is the biggest deficit we've seen the Democrats ever run in a generic ballot test.
Wow.
The thing we always remember, the old saw is, we don't vote for generic candidates. And you vote for actual incumbents or actual opponents.
Sure.
And the Democrats have got an enthusiasm gap that they have to deal with their core electorate. It's going to be hard to turn them out. The Republicans and conservatives seem very fired up at turning out. And also, a first-term president at midterm usually confronts a big seat loss because they've tried to do a lot.
Right.
And there's a lot out there for swing voters to be unhappy about. Independents are not pleased with the president's administration. They feel like it's pushed too far to the left. So the aggregate forecast models say the Democrats could lose up to 52, 53 seats, which means a Republican House. Larry Sabato is saying mid-40s in terms of losses. The number I've been looking at district by district, a month ago I was saying 35, 36 seat loss. I'm inclined to agree with Larry Sabato now. I mean, I think the Democrats can still hold the Senate, but the House, right now looks like it's
precarious,
gone.
huh?
Precarious, I think precarious would be welcome to Democrats right now. They'd settle for precarious.
Well, in Oklahoma, we had a runoff a couple of weeks ago for the congressional seat being vacated by Mary Fallin. A guy named James Lankford wound up winning that seat.
Yep.
He was the big story, I guess, of August anyway. Beat 3 either current or former state lawmakers and 4 other Republicans doing that. And it was quite an interesting story. And I was wondering, he's a Baptist youth director, never run for anything before. And I was wondering if that story was just unique to his circumstances and that situation in Oklahoma City and Edmond and Seminole and Pot counties, or if that race was somehow part of a bigger trend of what's going on in the country.
We're still trying to figure that out. Most of the primaries that are being won for open seats are being won by people with political experience.
Okay.
You don't see a lot of amateurs prevailing. But the amateurs that are winning primaries tend to have either a strong grassroots base, strong tie to, on the Republican side, strong ties to evangelical Christianity, which is the perfect mechanism for mobilizing in politics. Evangelical Christianity and American campaign politics rely on the same techniques, and they're tailor-made for each other, Chris. They really are. But for James Lankford, he had this tremendous grassroots presence.
Right.
And then that turned into money. And then he ran ahead of expectations, and being the primary leader, he won the runoff like we expected.
Right.
But he also ran a good campaign. It was a good grassroots campaign.
It was smart.
With enough
It was a smart campaign.
Well, you talk to voters about what voters were concerned about. This is not a good year to be running just on your own experience and to be
Especially
running
legislative experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, most lawmakers are going to make it back. 90% of Congress will get reelected, probably. But it's still not the best idea in a year where people are frustrated with Washington and frustrated with state government and frustrated with taxes to say that I'm a veteran lawmaker. And for Kevin Calvi had a well-funded campaign, and it was a neat strategy. It hit everything you're supposed to hit on the way to the Republican nomination, but it just never clicked with more than a third of the electorate. And at the end of the day, they took a look at James Lankford, and they liked what they saw. And I've met Mr. Lankford. He is an impressive candidate.
Right. Speaking of turnout models, I think he probably got almost every vote he had out there to go vote on that both Tuesdays.
It's the voter fall-off was pretty substantial overall. But Lankford, actually, I think he increased his total. I'd have to go back and check. They turned everybody back out. And that's a tribute to their grassroots organization and to the application of social networking to manage the grassroots. You can't just put up a Facebook page, get a bunch of friends, and call it done. James Lankford had 10,000 people on that page for a reason.
18,000.
Yeah, but it's not just all the kids that went through Falls Creek.
No,
it's their parents, it's their grandparents, and he doesn't. He's not standing out there handing out volleyballs. He's raising money. He's meeting with families. He's going around the state and around the country, getting kids and getting congregations to send their kids to this camp. And that's campaign work, no matter how you cut it. James Lankford may not have been a politician, but he is an experienced campaigner.
And, along the lines of that seat, 4 years ago, a lot was made of the fact that Mary Fallin, only the second woman ever elected to Congress from Oklahoma, and now a lot's being made of the fact that you're going to have a woman governor in Oklahoma because both nominees, obviously. But, 11 people filed to replace Fallin in Congress. Not one of them was a woman. And, I don't know about all the down-ballot races, but, there obviously have been some women in the secondary offices in Oklahoma. But is there a bench, a deep bench for women candidates back there? I mean, are there, apart from Askins and Fallin, who are the women stars, emerging stars back there?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we look at, if you look at Oklahoma and electing women, Oklahoma does not have a good record. Second lowest number of women in legislative office in the United States. The largest constituency represented by a woman right now, other than the largest constituency where you have a female executive in power is actually the city of Norman, where Cindy Rosenthal's mayor of a town of 110,000 people. You've got some state Senate districts with women, a few state House districts. It's hard to peg an emerging, rising female star. The strongest female politicians, and they are two of the best politicians in the state, are running for governor right now. So part of, the thing with term limits is part of what can make women powerful and effective is being able to continue in office, to be able to collect institutional power, encourage the election of other women. And in Oklahoma with term limits, it opens up opportunities to run, but it doesn't encourage longevity in female lawmakers. It makes it harder to set up the good old girls network to bring women into elective office. Other thing is we're skewing heavily Republican. Most women nationally who run for public office still run as Democrats.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sarah Palin notwithstanding, I guess. Or the two women in California. I mean, you've got gubernatorial and U.S. Senate candidates, Republican gubernatorial and U.S. Senate candidates.
Well, and Chris, that is actually the thing we need to be watching in Oklahoma for the next few years. Is there's a generation of Republican women who are emerging, they are professionals. Okay, they are professionals. They're young. They are attractive candidates. They are articulate, and they go to core Republican values. And feminism has a lot of dimensions, and it's probably better to ask a feminist scholar about this, but I'm going to shout out to my former graduate student, Jocelyn Evans, whose doctoral dissertation was called The Wrong Women on the Hill, which was about how Republican women get into elective office. And she had a subsequent book on this topic as well. Republican women plow a different row, okay? And it's harder for Republican women to get nominated because they're perceived as being more liberal than the status quo for the GOP, but if they can get nominated, they're perceived as being more moderate than a Democratic woman, and they have an easier time moving to the center.
Interesting.
So, what we're going to be looking for is a generation of young, articulate, energized women, which means that you have to be looking around at the folks that are running campaigns right now, organizing community organizations. There's a young woman named Jamie Maddie that did an outstanding job of helping organize the MAPS election in Oklahoma City. I don't know if she'll ever run for public office, but she's an example of the kind of woman you would expect to see running in the future in this mold, which is professional but also conservative, feminist but also traditional.
Right.
And it's a new model for female candidates in the U.S., but man, things change.
Without putting you on the spot to predict a winner in the gubernatorial race, what do you look for in that campaign? And what will be interesting to watch in that campaign? It'll
be interesting to watch how the Democrats try and make Mary Fallon into a D.C. candidate. It will be interesting to see how the Republicans try and make Jerry Askins into a national Democrat. And these are both hard tricks to pull off. These women are great campaigners. I mean, if you've ever seen either of them work a room, go on a campaign stop, they remember everybody's name. They have a story on
Perfect
people.
Lieutenant Governors.
Perfect Lieutenant Governor. And actually, it tells you something interesting, the power of that office. It's a great venue to run for office from.
Right.
And you wait for the governor to leave town so you can be in charge. So, but, it's... I think the Democrats are almost going to have to run almost populist, run hard against anything big. Big corporations, big government. You can't trust any of this.
Does Askins get saddled with Obama? I mean, is that...
Oh, they'll try. They'll try.
Okay.
Well, during the primary campaign, she did a good job of finagling the health care issue. She can't avoid that in the general election. Mary Fallon still has to do some fence mending with folks who don't like her support of the TARP funds.
Right.
And some of the inconsistencies of opposing additional bailouts and then attempting to earmark monies or take credit for monies that come into the state of Oklahoma. Not earmarked, but to take credit for stimulus money coming in the state. You can't have it both ways. But I'm just not sure how much. A lot of the electorate seems to have made up its mind. There is a scenario where the Democrats can win several offices, but it's a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 kind of chance. But that's why we watch them, and that's why everybody votes, so they can surprise us and we have things to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keith, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
All righty, Chris, pleasure.